A wealthy man mocked his loyal secretary and fired her. The next day, he discovered she had secretly invested in his rival's most successful venture. The grand oak doors to Jonathan Cartwright's office stood ajar, an invitation laced with tension. Inside, the room exuded power and precision. Rich mahogany walls were adorned with framed accolades, their polished surfaces gleaming under the soft light of a chandelier. The faint crackle of the fireplace in the corner provided a semblance of warmth, though the chill in the room was unmistakable. Behind a massive desk sat Jonathan himself, his tailored suit immaculate, his steel blue eyes fixed on the glowing screen of his laptop. His expression was sharp, calculating, like a hunter closing in on his prey. Outside the threshold, Evelyn Montgomery stood still, her back straight and hands folded neatly. The uniform she had worn for over 12 years, a crisp white blouse and fitted black slacks, felt heavier than usual, like fragile armor against the brewing storm. The hallways that once carried a sense of familiarity now felt foreign, their grandeur suffocating. She had walked these floors countless times, seamlessly navigating the demands of one of the city's wealthiest men. But today, something was different. "Come in," Jonathan called, his voice low, clipped, and devoid of warmth. Evelyn stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble. She moved with measured grace, stopping just shy of the imposing desk. Her hands remained clasped in front of her, her demeanor calm despite the growing unease in her chest. "You asked to see me, Mr. Cartwright?" she said, her voice steady but cautious. Jonathan didn't look up immediately. His fingers hovered over the laptop keyboard for a moment longer before he leaned back in his chair, finally meeting her gaze. His expression was unreadable, his piercing eyes scanning her face as though searching for cracks in a facade. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked, his tone laced with quiet menace. Evelyn blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "No, sir, but I assume it's important." "Important," Jonathan repeated, almost to himself. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, fingers steepled. "You've been with me for how long now? 12 years, isn't it?" 12 and a half, she corrected softly, her pride faint but palpable. 12 and a half years, he echoed, his voice carrying an edge. "And in all that time, would you say I've treated you fairly?" The question landed like a sharp dart. Evelyn hesitated, searching his face for a clue to his intent. "Yes, sir, I believe so." Jonathan tilted his head, studying her intently. "Then help me understand something." He stood suddenly, moving around the desk to lean against its edge. The shift in his position felt calculated, designed to unsettle. "How is it that sensitive information about my Phoenix Tower project, information known only to my most trusted team, has ended up in the hands of Victor Langston?" Evelyn's breath caught. The name alone was a thunderclap. Victor Langston was Jonathan's most ruthless rival, a man who thrived on exploiting weaknesses. The weight of the accusation hit her like a blow. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully, choosing her words with precision. "I would never betray your trust." Jonathan's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "Spare me the denials, Evelyn. The leak started weeks ago, perfectly timed, perfectly targeted. And you, more than anyone, have had access to everything. My schedules, my files, even my private office." Evelyn's stomach churned. "Mr. Cartwright, I have never compromised your trust. If there's been a breach, it didn't come from me." Jonathan straightened, his voice hardening. "Do you think I can afford to take that chance? Loyalty is not currency, Evelyn. It doesn't pay dividends." The words stung more than she cared to admit. For 12 years, she had been more than just an employee. She had been the one constant in his chaotic world, anticipating his needs before he voiced them, managing the unmanageable. To hear him dismiss her so casually was a betrayal she hadn't expected. "After everything I've done for you," she said, her voice trembling but defiant, "I don't deserve this." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "What you deserve is irrelevant. What matters is what I can prove, and right now, I can't prove your innocence." "You're firing me," Evelyn whispered, the words barely audible. "You can leave your keys with security on your way out," he replied coldly, already turning away. "This conversation is over." Evelyn's world tilted, but she refused to let the emotion show. She stood frozen for a moment, then turned sharply, her heels clicking louder now as she made her way to the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The corridors of the mansion seemed longer than usual, their opulence mocking her. The chandelier she had dusted countless times now seemed to glint cruelly in the soft light. The gilded mirrors reflected her image back at her, a woman discarded, diminished. By the time she reached the massive front doors, her composure was slipping. She pushed through them, stepping into the cool evening air. The world outside felt sharper, the chill biting against her skin. For a moment, she stood on the marble steps, her breath visible in the cold. She clenched her fists, willing herself to hold it together. Then she saw it. A sleek black limousine idled near the gates, its engine purring softly. The driver, an older man in a sharp suit, stepped out and opened the rear door with a practiced hand. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding. The man nodded toward her, his expression neutral yet somehow knowing. It was an unspoken invitation. For a brief moment, she hesitated. The weight of humiliation and anger warred with her innate caution. But something in the stillness of the moment, the quiet hum of the car, the subtle nod of the driver, pushed her forward. With quiet determination, she walked to the limousine and slid into the back seat. Inside his office, Jonathan watched from the window, his silhouette framed against the glow of the fireplace. He saw the taillights of the limousine as they disappeared into the night, his expression stoic. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt the sting of uncertainty. He had always trusted his instincts, but tonight, doubt crept in like a shadow. And here's a question for you. If you were in Evelyn's shoes, accused and humiliated after years of loyalty, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And hey, if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales like this one. The mansion's grand facade, with its sprawling gardens and intricate stonework, seemed smaller as Evelyn walked away from it. She held her head high, but each step felt heavier, as if the weight of the last 12 years threatened to drag her down. The life she had built, the loyalty she had given. It was all gone with the sharpness of Jonathan Cartwright's dismissal. Her mind raced as she reached the main gates. She thought of the long nights spent organizing his affairs, the weekends she had sacrificed, and the moments she had anticipated his needs before he even voiced them. For over a decade, Evelyn had lived in the shadows of Jonathan's empire, ensuring his success while receiving little acknowledgement in return. And now, accused of betrayal without proof, she was cast aside like an afterthought. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, the chill of the evening air hit her. The distant hum of city life was oddly comforting, a reminder that the world outside Cartwright's fortress continued to turn. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself, but the knot of anger and disbelief in her chest refused to loosen. The limousine was still there, parked just beyond the gates. Its glossy black surface reflected the golden glow of the streetlights. The driver remained by the open door, his demeanor calm and unreadable. Evelyn hesitated. She had no idea who was inside or what awaited her, but the uncertainty felt strangely liberating. Without looking back, she approached the car and stepped in. The interior was luxurious, with dark leather seats and a soft glow from hidden lights. Sitting across from her was a man she recognized immediately, Victor Langston. His reputation preceded him, a charismatic tycoon known for his ruthless business tactics and, most importantly, his rivalry with Jonathan Cartwright. Victor's smile was slow and calculated, his tailored gray suit unwrinkled as if he had been waiting for this moment for hours. "Evelyn Montgomery," he said, his voice smooth. "I had a feeling we'd meet eventually." Evelyn sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone wary. Victor chuckled lightly, leaning forward. "I could ask you the same thing, but let's not waste time with pleasantries. I know what happened back there. Jonathan doesn't know how to value loyalty when it stares him in the face." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "If you think I'm here to badmouth him, you're mistaken." "Fair enough," Victor said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "But you can't deny that his actions tonight left you unmoored. A woman like you doesn't walk away from 12 years of dedication without a scar. Evelyn remained silent, her gaze steady. She wasn't about to reveal the turmoil roiling within her. Victor, however, seemed content to fill the silence. "I've been watching you for a while," he continued, his tone conversational but precise. "Your work for Jonathan was impeccable, discreet, efficient, invaluable. Yet, he dismissed you without a second thought. That's where he and I differ." Evelyn arched an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "And what's your point, Mr. Langston?" Victor leaned back, his smile widening. "My point, Evelyn, is that you're too talented to let this setback define you. I'm offering you a way forward, a chance to use your skills in a way that rewards you, not diminishes you." Her eyes narrowed. "A way forward? Or a way for you to get back at Jonathan?" Victor's expression didn't falter. "Perhaps both. But make no mistake, this is about you as much as it's about him. I see potential in you, Evelyn. The question is, do you?" Evelyn's mind raced. Victor's words were tempting, but they were also laced with danger. Aligning with him could mean stepping into a battlefield far more cutthroat than anything she had experienced. Yet, the alternative, walking away with nothing, felt like conceding defeat. "What would you need from me?" she asked, her voice cautious. Victor's smile softened, becoming almost sincere. "For now, your presence, your insight, your ability to see what others miss. I don't expect you to betray secrets, that's not my style. But I do expect you to think bigger, to see yourself not as someone who serves, but as someone who leads." The limousine slowed, and Evelyn realized they were approaching a towering high-rise in the heart of the city. Its sleek design was unmistakable, a Langston property. The car came to a stop, and the driver opened the door, gesturing for Evelyn to step out. Victor looked at her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "You don't have to decide tonight. Take some time. But remember, the world outside Jonathan's shadow is vast, and it's waiting for you." Evelyn stepped out, the cold air biting at her skin. She watched as the limousine disappeared into the night, her thoughts a chaotic tangle. Part of her wanted to reject everything Victor represented, but another part, the part that had been silenced for years, felt a flicker of possibility. Back at Jonathan's mansion, the evening was far less composed. Jonathan stood by the window in his office, staring at the gates where Evelyn had disappeared. He clenched a glass of whiskey in one hand, the ice clinking softly as he swirled it. The firelight flickered against his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. "Martin," he barked, calling for his assistant. A younger man entered, his tablet in hand. "Yes, sir?" "Find out where Evelyn went," Jonathan ordered. "I want to know who picked her up and why." Martin hesitated. "Sir, don't you think?" "I don't pay you to think," Jonathan snapped. "Just do it." Martin nodded quickly and left the room, leaving Jonathan alone with his thoughts. He sipped his whiskey, the liquid burning its way down his throat. For years, he had trusted his instincts, built his empire on decisiveness and control. But tonight, for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt the first inklings of doubt. As the night wore on, Evelyn sat in her modest apartment, staring out at the city lights. Victor's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the bitterness of Jonathan's accusations. She thought of everything she had endured to reach this point, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the unspoken loyalty, and she realized that she was standing at a crossroads. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine a life where she wasn't in the shadows. A life where she wasn't just someone's assistant, but someone who called the shots. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly unfamiliar. And as she stared at the city below, Evelyn made a silent vow. No matter what happened next, she would never allow herself to be underestimated again. The following morning was unusually quiet for Evelyn. The faint hum of her coffee maker was the only sound in her modest apartment. She sat by the window, the steaming cup cradled in her hands, her eyes fixed on the city skyline. It was a world she had been a part of for so long, but always as an observer, never a participant. Now, the prospect of stepping into it on her own terms loomed both daunting and thrilling. Her thoughts drifted back to the limousine ride and Victor Langston's offer. His words had stayed with her, reverberating in her mind like a persistent echo. She didn't trust him, not entirely. His reputation as a ruthless opportunist preceded him, but she couldn't deny the opportunity he presented. The chance to reclaim her dignity, to prove her worth, not to Jonathan, but to herself, was almost too tempting to ignore. Evelyn's phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. The screen displayed an unknown number, and she hesitated before answering. "Hello? Ms. Montgomery," came Victor's unmistakable voice, smooth and confident. "I trust you had time to consider my proposition." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her grip tightening around her mug. "It's a lot to process," she admitted. "You're asking me to walk into a world I've never navigated." Victor chuckled lightly. "You underestimate yourself. You've been navigating it for years, just from the shadows. I'm offering you a chance to step into the light. And in return," she asked, her tone sharp, "what's your angle, Mr. Langston?" "My angle is simple," Victor replied. "Jonathan Cartwright is a formidable adversary, but he's predictable. You, however, are the variable he never accounted for. Aligning with me benefits us both. I gain your insight, and you gain a platform to showcase the brilliance he failed to see." Evelyn exhaled slowly. His words were persuasive, but she wasn't naive. "I'm not interested in being a pawn in your rivalry." "Good," Victor said smoothly, "because I'm not offering you that. I don't need a pawn, Evelyn. I need a partner." The line went quiet for a moment as Evelyn considered his words. Finally, she spoke. "I'll meet with you, but on my terms." "Excellent," Victor said, his satisfaction evident. "My office, noon. I'll have everything prepared." By the time Evelyn arrived at Langston Industries, the sun was high in the sky, casting sharp reflections off the sleek glass exterior of the building. The lobby was a study in modern opulence, polished marble floors, minimalist furnishings, and a towering waterfall feature that whispered elegance without ostentation. A receptionist greeted her with a warm smile and led her to the top floor, where Victor's office awaited. The elevator doors opened to reveal a sprawling workspace that felt more like an art gallery than a corporate suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the city, while carefully chosen pieces of modern art adorned the walls. Victor stood near his desk, looking out over the skyline with a contemplative expression. "Evelyn," he said, turning to greet her as she stepped inside. Punctual as always, she offered a polite nod, her expression guarded. "I figured you'd appreciate that." Victor gestured to a pair of chairs near the window. "Please, have a seat. Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" "No, thank you," she replied, settling into the chair. "Let's get to the point." Victor smiled, clearly impressed by her directness. He took the seat opposite her, folding his hands neatly. "Very well. Here's what I propose. I want you to join my team, not as an employee, but as a strategist. Your role would be to provide insights, identify opportunities, and help shape the direction of our upcoming ventures." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And Jonathan? How does he fit into this plan of yours?" Victor leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Jonathan Cartwright has dominated this city for years, but his empire is built on fragile foundations. The Phoenix Tower project is a prime example. His vision is ambitious, but his execution is faltering. My goal is not to destroy him, it's to outpace him. With your help, I can do that." Evelyn studied him, her mind racing. The offer was tempting, but she wasn't blind to the risks. Aligning with Victor could make her a target, especially if Jonathan suspected her involvement. Yet, the alternative, walking away and letting her dismissal define her, felt like surrender. "What's in it for me?" she asked, her tone measured. Victor's smile widened. "Aside from the satisfaction of proving him wrong, you'll have access to resources and connections that can elevate you to a position of influence. You'll no longer be a secretary, Evelyn. You'll be a force to be reckoned with." His words ignited something in her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so long in Jonathan's shadow, her potential overlooked, her contributions undervalued. The thought of stepping into a role where her voice carried weight, where her decisions shaped outcomes, was intoxicating. "I'll need guarantees," she said finally. "Full transparency. No backdoor dealings. No unethical tactics. Victor nodded. Agreed. I pride myself on playing the long game, Evelyn. A successful partnership is built on trust. She hesitated for a moment longer before extending her hand. Then you have a deal. Victor took her hand, his grip firm. Welcome to the team. Meanwhile, across town, Jonathan sat in his office, poring over reports on the Phoenix Tower project. The leaks had slowed, but the damage was done. Investors were growing wary, and his team struggled to maintain momentum. His assistant, Martin, entered the room with a hesitant expression. Sir, you wanted updates on Evelyn Montgomery? Martin said, holding out a folder. Jonathan glanced up, his eyes narrowing. What have you got? Martin cleared his throat. She's been seen meeting with Victor Langston. Twice in the last 48 hours. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Victor, he muttered, his voice low. Of course. There's no indication she shared any proprietary information, Martin added quickly. But their meetings are concerning. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Evelyn had always been loyal, dependable. The idea of her aligning with Victor felt like a betrayal, though he knew he had no one to blame but himself. Keep monitoring her, he said finally, and report back if anything changes. As Martin left, Jonathan turned his gaze to the window. The city stretched out before him, its endless possibilities now tinged with uncertainty. He had underestimated Evelyn once, and it had cost him. He wouldn't make that mistake again. For Evelyn, the partnership with Victor was just the beginning. But for Jonathan, it was the start of a reckoning he couldn't yet foresee. The morning sun filtered through the towering windows of Jonathan Cartwright's penthouse office, casting intricate patterns on the Persian rug below. The space, usually humming with activity, was eerily quiet save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Jonathan sat at his desk, his usual aura of command overshadowed by a growing unease. His empire, the life he had meticulously constructed, felt as though it was slipping through his fingers. The reports laid out before him told a grim story. Investor confidence was waning. Rumors of instability within his company had spread like wildfire, fueled by the recent leaks surrounding the Phoenix Tower project. Even his most loyal allies were beginning to question his leadership. But it wasn't just the leaks. It was something else, something more personal. Evelyn. Her name lingered in his mind like a persistent whisper. He had spent the past week convincing himself that dismissing her was the right decision, yet doubt gnawed at him. She had been a constant in his life for over a decade, someone who anticipated his needs before he even voiced them. Now, the thought of her aligning with Victor Langston made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar pang of regret. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Jonathan's assistant, Martin, entered cautiously, a tablet clutched in his hands. Sir, Martin began, his tone tentative. There's something I think you should see. Jonathan gestured for him to continue, his expression hardening. What is it? Martin placed the tablet on the desk and swiped to open an article from a business news site. The headline, bold and damning, read, Former Cartwright employee partners with Langston Industries. A strategic move against the Phoenix Tower? Jonathan's stomach churned as he scrolled through the article. A grainy photo accompanied the text, showing Evelyn stepping out of Victor Langston's sleek black limousine. She was poised, confident, and impeccably dressed, a stark contrast to the Evelyn he had known. Her usual uniform had been replaced by a tailored navy blue suit, her hair styled in loose waves. She looked every bit the powerful strategist the article described. She didn't waste any time. Jonathan muttered, his jaw tightening. Victor's using her as a pawn. Martin hesitated. Sir, it's possible, but the details are odd. According to our sources, she hasn't shared any proprietary information about Cartwright Enterprises. Her role seems more strategic. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the desk. Strategic, he repeated, his voice bitter. That's a polite way of saying she's helping him dismantle everything I've built. Martin cleared his throat. Sir, there's another update. Victor Langston's firm has seen a surge in its stock price this morning. The rumors of insider knowledge about the Phoenix Tower project have sparked renewed investor interest. Jonathan's grip on the tablet tightened. So, it's working, he said through gritted teeth. Victor is using Evelyn to undermine me. She's giving him exactly what he needs. Perhaps, Martin said carefully, but Evelyn worked for you for 12 years. Are you certain she'd betray you like this? Jonathan's eyes darkened. I can't afford to assume otherwise. Later that day, Jonathan attended a high-level meeting with his senior advisors. The mood in the room was somber, the weight of recent events evident on everyone's faces. Charts and graphs projected on the screen detailed the fallout from the leaks, delays in the Phoenix Tower project, budget overruns, and a growing list of dissatisfied stakeholders. We need a decisive response, said Caldwell, one of Jonathan's most trusted advisors. The longer we let Langston control the narrative, the harder it will be to recover. Jonathan nodded, his mind racing. What's the status of our internal investigation into the leaks? We've traced them back to a senior member of your staff, Caldwell replied, passing a folder across the table. The details are all here. It wasn't Evelyn. Jonathan's breath hitched as he opened the folder. The culprit was someone he had trusted implicitly, a senior advisor who had been with the company for nearly as long as Evelyn. The betrayal stung, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. Evelyn hadn't been the source of the leaks. She was innocent. For a moment, he sat in stunned silence, the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. He had cast Evelyn out without proof, tarnished her reputation, and pushed her into Victor Langston's orbit. And now, she was thriving in a world he had underestimated her ability to navigate. Caldwell, Jonathan said finally, his voice quieter now. Thank you. Leave the folder. I'll handle this personally. The room emptied, leaving Jonathan alone with his thoughts. He stared at the folder, the faces and names within blurring as his mind replayed the events of the past week. Evelyn's words echoed in his memory. After everything I've done for you, I don't deserve this. He had been wrong. By evening, Jonathan found himself pacing the length of his penthouse living room, a glass of whiskey untouched on the coffee table. The city lights stretched out before him, a dazzling sea of possibility and regret. For years, he had prided himself on his ability to read people, to anticipate their motives and weaknesses. Yet, with Evelyn, he had failed spectacularly. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Martin. Sir, I found something else, Martin said, his tone uneasy. Evelyn isn't just working with Victor. She's been attending high-level industry conferences, making connections with some of the biggest players in the field. She's building something. Jonathan sank into a chair, his head resting against his hand. Evelyn wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The realization cut deeper than he expected. Thank you, Martin, he said, his voice heavy. That will be all. As he ended the call, Jonathan stared at the city skyline. Evelyn had been wronged, but she had turned that injustice into an opportunity. She was no longer the quiet, dependable secretary he had taken for granted. She was a force to be reckoned with, and for the first time, Jonathan felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar. Admiration. But admiration wouldn't solve his problems. If he wanted to salvage the Phoenix Tower and his reputation, he needed to act, and quickly. And that meant confronting Evelyn, not as an adversary, but as someone who understood her value. For Jonathan Cartwright, the path forward was clear. But whether Evelyn would listen was another matter entirely. The Langston Foundation Charity Gala was a spectacle of wealth and influence. The ballroom's vaulted ceilings were adorned with glittering chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering light across a sea of tailored suits and couture gowns. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne flutes, their movements practiced and seamless. The room was alive with the low hum of conversation, punctuated by polite laughter and the occasional clink of glasses. Jonathan Cartwright adjusted the cuffs of his black tuxedo, his jaw tight as he surveyed the scene. He didn't want to be here, but skipping the gala wasn't an option. His absence would have been interpreted as weakness, a signal that Victor Langston's recent victories had shaken him. And if there was one thing Jonathan couldn't afford, it was appearing vulnerable. His eyes scanned the room, searching for Victor's unmistakable figure. The man was infamous for his dramatic entrances, always ensuring he commanded attention the moment he arrived. But as Jonathan moved deeper into the crowd, His gaze landed on something, or rather, someone, unexpected. Evelyn. She stood near the grand piano, her posture commanding and her presence impossible to ignore. Gone was the quiet, understated woman he had once known. Evelyn was radiant, her emerald green gown accentuating her figure, the soft waves of her hair cascading over her shoulders. A pair of diamond earrings sparkled against her skin, catching the light every time she turned her head. She wasn't just attending the gala, she was owning it. Jonathan felt a jolt of disbelief, followed by something he couldn't quite place. Anger? Admiration? Perhaps both. Whatever it was, it unsettled him. He had spent the last week grappling with the fallout of her dismissal, but seeing her here, transformed and thriving, was more than he had anticipated. Unbelievable, he muttered under his breath. Ah, Jonathan, came a familiar voice behind him, dripping with smug amusement. Jonathan turned to see Victor Langston, his rival dressed impeccably in a midnight black tuxedo, his signature smirk firmly in place. Victor, Jonathan greeted, his tone cold. Enjoying yourself? Victor chuckled lightly, swirling the champagne in his glass. How could I not? The night is young, the company is delightful, and the power plays are subtle yet deliciously effective. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. What are you playing at? Victor followed Jonathan's gaze, his smirk widening as he spotted Evelyn. Ah, yes. Quite the transformation, isn't it? She's truly found her footing. You should be proud. After all, you were the one who set her free. Jonathan's fists clenched at his sides. What's your angle, Victor? My angle? Victor raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. I simply recognize potential where you failed to. Evelyn is a remarkable woman. Perhaps if you had seen that sooner, she'd still be by your side instead of here, flourishing in my circles. Before Jonathan could respond, Victor clapped him on the shoulder. Enjoy the evening, old friend. It's bound to be enlightening. Victor sauntered away, leaving Jonathan seething. He turned his attention back to Evelyn, who was now surrounded by a small group of well-dressed men and women. They hung on her every word, their laughter punctuating the conversation. She seemed at ease, her confidence radiating with every gesture. Jonathan debated whether to approach her. Confronting Evelyn in the middle of a crowded gala wasn't ideal, but the longer he waited, the more his curiosity burned. Finally, he made his decision. He crossed the room, weaving through clusters of attendees until he stood just a few feet away. Evelyn turned as he approached, her expression unreadable, but her sharp eyes unmistakably aware. Jonathan, she said, her tone calm, almost amused. I didn't expect to see you here. That makes two of us, he replied, his voice clipped. You've been busy. She tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at her lips. You could say that. Jonathan studied her, searching for some sign of the woman he had once known. But this Evelyn was a stranger, self-assured, poised, and completely unshaken by his presence. The transformation was as unsettling as it was impressive. What are you doing here? He demanded, his voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. Evelyn sipped her champagne, her movements deliberate. I was invited by Victor, he said, his tone laced with accusation. Her smile widened ever so slightly. Does it matter? It matters to me, Jonathan said firmly. You've been aligning yourself with my rival, showing up in places you don't belong. Places I don't belong, she interrupted, her voice sharp but measured. And where exactly do I belong, Jonathan? Back in your mansion, cleaning up your messes while you accuse me of things I didn't do? Her words hit their mark, but Jonathan refused to let it show. You didn't answer my question. Evelyn set her glass down on a nearby table, folding her arms as she regarded him. I'm here because I can be. Because I've built something for myself outside of your shadow. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should reflect on why. Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a man approached, a prominent investor Jonathan recognized immediately. The man greeted Evelyn warmly, shaking her hand. Evelyn, the man said, his voice enthusiastic. It's wonderful to see you again. Your insights at last week's conference were invaluable. Evelyn smiled graciously. Thank you, Richard. I'm glad you found them helpful. The man turned to Jonathan, offering a polite nod. Jonathan, it's been a while. Yes, Jonathan replied stiffly.
It has.
As the man walked away, Jonathan turned back to Evelyn, his frustration mounting. What conference? She raised an eyebrow, her expression one of quiet amusement. The one you weren't invited to. The implication hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Evelyn wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And for the first time, Jonathan realized the extent of what he had lost. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Jonathan remained at the gala, though his mind was elsewhere. He watched as Evelyn moved through the room, engaging effortlessly with people who had once been his allies. Each interaction chipped away at his certainty, leaving him with more questions than answers. By the time he returned home, the weight of the evening pressed heavily on him. Evelyn had become something extraordinary, but she had done so without him, and perhaps because of him. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt the sting of regret. Evelyn, meanwhile, left the gala with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had faced Jonathan on equal footing and emerged unshaken. But as the city lights blurred past the window of her car, she knew the night's events were just the beginning. Jonathan Cartwright's office was silent, save for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. The morning light streamed through the towering windows, highlighting the sharp lines of his furrowed brow as he flipped through the stack of documents Martin had handed him. Each page seemed heavier than the last, the weight of its contents pressing down on him. The truth was staring back at him, cold and irrefutable. The leaks that had plagued the Phoenix Tower project, the ones that had led him to fire Evelyn Montgomery, hadn't come from her. They had come from within, specifically from a trusted senior advisor who had been feeding information to Victor Langston for months. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he read the final report. The advisor's betrayal was damning, but what stung more was his own misstep. He had allowed suspicion and paranoia to cloud his judgment, and in doing so, he had wrongfully dismissed the one person who had stood by him through it all. He set the folder down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the implications of his actions settled over him. Evelyn hadn't betrayed him. She had been innocent, and he had cast her out without proof, tarnishing her reputation and driving her straight into Victor Langston's orbit. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Martin entered, his expression cautious. "Sir, I thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing over a tablet. Jonathan glanced at the screen. It was an image from a recent business conference, a candid photo of Evelyn standing at a podium, speaking with poise and authority to an audience of industry leaders. Her expression was confident, her body language commanding. She looked every bit the strategist the accompanying article described. "The rising star," Jonathan read aloud, his tone bitter as he scanned the headline. The article praised Evelyn's sharp insights and her ability to navigate high-stakes negotiations, positioning her as a formidable player in the industry. "She's made quite the impression," Martin said hesitantly. Several of the attendees at that conference were former Cartwright investors. They seemed interested in her vision. Jonathan's chest tightened. Evelyn wasn't just surviving. She was thriving in a way he hadn't anticipated. He set the tablet down and pinched the bridge of his nose, his mind racing. "Thank you, Martin," he said finally. "That will be all." As Martin left, Jonathan turned his chair to face the window, the city skyline stretching endlessly before him. His reflection stared back at him, shadowed and strained. He had made a mistake, a monumental one, and now he was paying the price. But it wasn't just the loss of a trusted employee that weighed on him. It was something deeper. Evelyn's success felt like a reflection of his failure to see her potential, to value her contributions, and to treat her as more than a cog in his machine. Across town, Evelyn sat in a sleek, modern office, the Langston Industries logo prominently displayed on the glass door behind her. The room was a far cry from Jonathan's mahogany fortress. Minimalist and bathed in natural light, with clean lines and a sense of openness that mirrored her current mindset. Victor Langston leaned against the edge of her desk, his arms crossed as he watched her review a set of documents. His usual smirk was absent, replaced by an expression of genuine interest. "You've outdone yourself," he said, his tone warm. "The pitch you delivered at the conference? Flawless." Investors are eating it up. Evelyn didn't look up. I'm not interested in their approval. I'm interested in results. Victor chuckled. And results you shall have. You've already secured 2 new contracts for Langston Industries, and the board is buzzing about your next move. Evelyn set the papers down and met his gaze. I'm not here to play the board's games. I'm here to build something meaningful. Victor raised an eyebrow, impressed. Spoken like someone who's finally found her footing, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, a small smile tugging at her lips. I've always had my footing. I just needed the right ground to stand on. Victor's admiration was evident, but he didn't press further. He knew better than to question the determination of a woman who had risen from the shadows of Jonathan Cartwright's empire to become a force in her own right. That evening, Jonathan sat alone in his study, nursing a glass of scotch as the fire crackled softly in the hearth. The day's revelations played over in his mind, each one chipping away at his confidence. He had built his empire on decisiveness and control, yet in this instance, he had allowed emotion and insecurity to guide his actions. Evelyn's words from the gala echoed in his mind. I've built something for myself outside of your shadow. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should reflect on why. He stared at the fire, the amber glow illuminating the lines of his face. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt the sting of regret, not just for his actions, but for the opportunities he had squandered. Evelyn had been more than just an employee. She had been an asset, a confidant, and in many ways, the backbone of his success. And he had let her slip away. The thought of reaching out to her felt both necessary and daunting. He wasn't used to admitting fault, but if he wanted to salvage the Phoenix Tower project, and perhaps something more, he needed to confront Evelyn directly. Not as an adversary, but as someone who understood her worth. Jonathan picked up his phone and hesitated for a moment before typing out a message. Evelyn, we need to talk. Name the time and place. He stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the send button. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed it. The message sent, and Jonathan leaned back in his chair, the weight of his decision settling over him. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. The story between him and Evelyn was far from over. The cafe on 8th Street was far removed from the towering skyscrapers and bustling boardrooms that typically defined Jonathan Cartwright's world. Its warm, rustic interior was a stark contrast to the cold opulence of his usual surroundings. Wooden tables, the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and the murmur of quiet conversations created an atmosphere that was almost disarming. Jonathan sat by the window, his sharp suit and polished shoes feeling out of place amidst the casual patrons. He checked his watch, 11:57 a.m. Evelyn's response to his message had been brief. 8th Street Cafe. Noon. The directness of it mirrored the woman he was meeting, and Jonathan appreciated the efficiency, even if it unsettled him. The door chimed softly as Evelyn entered, and Jonathan's breath caught at the sight of her. She was composed and radiant, wearing a tailored black blazer over a cream blouse, her hair swept into a sleek ponytail. There was an effortless confidence in the way she carried herself, a far cry from the Evelyn he had once known. She spotted him immediately, her expression neutral but sharp. Without hesitation, she walked over and took the seat across from him, setting her bag neatly on the chair beside her. Jonathan, she greeted, her voice calm and measured. Evelyn, he replied, sitting straighter. Thank you for meeting me. She folded her hands on the table, her gaze unwavering. I was curious. You don't typically ask for meetings. You summon. The comment wasn't a barb, but it carried a weight that wasn't lost on Jonathan. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her point. You're right, he admitted. But this isn't a typical situation. Evelyn tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. Then let's get to it. Why are we here? Jonathan exhaled, leaning forward slightly. I made a mistake, Evelyn. A serious one. And I'm here to take responsibility for it. Her eyebrows lifted, but she said nothing, letting him continue. I was wrong to accuse you, he said, his voice steady. I let paranoia and frustration cloud my judgment, and I fired you without cause. I know now that you weren't responsible for the leaks. Evelyn's expression didn't waver, though her eyes sharpened. What changed your mind? I found the real source, Jonathan admitted. A senior advisor, someone I trusted. The evidence was undeniable. Her gaze softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. And what about the damage you did to me? My reputation? My career? Jonathan swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. I know I can't undo the harm I caused, he said quietly, but I want to make amends. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, studying him. And how do you propose to do that? Jonathan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The Phoenix Tower project is at a critical juncture. I need someone with your skills, your insight, to help salvage it. I'm offering you a partnership, not as an employee, but as an equal. You'll have full authority to make strategic decisions, and you'll receive a significant equity stake. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then she let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. You've spent years treating me like a cog in your machine, and now you're asking me to help you rebuild it? Jonathan met her gaze, his tone earnest. I'm asking because I know you're the best person for the job, and because I trust you. Trust, she repeated, her voice laced with irony. That's a loaded word, Jonathan. You didn't trust me when it mattered most. I know, he admitted, the sincerity in his voice undeniable. And that's on me. But I'm here now, asking for a second chance. Not just for the Phoenix Tower, but for how I work with you. Evelyn regarded him for a long moment, her sharp mind weighing the offer. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave him to face the consequences of his actions alone. But another part, the part that still believed in the power of her skills and vision, saw the opportunity for what it was. This isn't about saving your tower, is it? She asked finally. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. It's about saving my legacy. And maybe a part of me too. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line as she considered his words. Finally, she spoke. I'll agree on one condition. Name it, Jonathan said immediately. I want full transparency, she said firmly. No half-truths, no hidden agendas. If I'm going to partner with you, I need to know exactly where we stand at all times. Jonathan nodded. Agreed. And, she added, leaning forward slightly, I expect to be treated as an equal. No more dismissive comments, no more power plays. If I'm going to help you, I need to know you respect me. You have my word, Jonathan said, his voice steady. Evelyn studied him for a moment longer before extending her hand. Then we have a deal. Jonathan shook her hand, his grip firm. Thank you, Evelyn. You won't regret this. I hope not, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. But don't mistake this for forgiveness. You still have a lot to prove. Jonathan nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. Fair enough. As they stood to leave, Evelyn paused, her expression thoughtful. You know, Jonathan, this isn't just about rebuilding your tower. It's about rebuilding trust. And that's going to take more than a deal. I understand, he said quietly, and I'm ready to do the work. Evelyn nodded, her confidence unwavering. Together, they stepped out of the cafe and into the bustling city streets, their newfound partnership marking the beginning of a journey neither of them could fully anticipate. The construction site of the Phoenix Tower was alive with activity, a symphony of grinding machinery, shouting foremen, and the occasional burst of sparks from welding torches. Evelyn Montgomery stood on the observation deck, a hard hat resting neatly on her styled hair, her tailored blazer unzipped to reveal a crisp white shirt. She surveyed the site below with a keen eye, noting the precision of the workers and the steady progress on what would soon become the crown jewel of the city's skyline. Jonathan Cartwright joined her moments later, his own hard hat slightly askew. The lines on his face, usually hardened by years of corporate battles, seemed softer, almost reflective. He handed Evelyn a tablet, the screen displaying a series of projections and updated blueprints. Final checks, he said, his voice steady. We're ahead of schedule. Evelyn glanced at the tablet, swiping through the data. Impressive, she remarked. But let's not celebrate until the last beam is in place. Jonathan chuckled softly. Always pragmatic. That's what makes you good at this. She shot him a sidelong glance. And what makes you think I wasn't always good at this? His smile faded slightly, replaced by something deeper. I know you were. I just didn't see it before. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her attention back to the site, the structure of the tower rising steadily into the sky. This project isn't just about the building, Jonathan. It's about what it represents. He nodded, his gaze following hers. A fresh start. For the tower. For the company. For both of us. The following weeks passed in a blur of meetings, negotiations, and meticulous oversight. Evelyn threw herself into the work with her usual focus, but this time, something was different. She wasn't just managing Jonathan's empire from the shadows. She was shaping it, her influence evident in every decision. Investors who had once been skeptical were now eager to align themselves with the project, drawn by the energy and vision she brought to the table. Jonathan, for his part, adapted to the new dynamic with surprising ease. He deferred to Evelyn in areas where her expertise outshone his and involved her in strategic discussions he would have once handled alone. The tension that had defined their earlier interactions gave way to a mutual respect that neither of them could deny. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast the city in hues of orange and gold, Jonathan and Evelyn met in his penthouse office. The space was cluttered with blueprints and documents, the normally pristine desk a testament to the intensity of their work. We're ready, Jonathan said, handing Evelyn a glass of scotch. The dedication ceremony is in 3 days. She accepted the glass but didn't drink. It's strange, she said, staring out at the city lights. After everything, I didn't think I'd ever be back here. Jonathan joined her by the window, his own glass in hand. You mean in this office? Or in my orbit? Both, she said simply. He smiled faintly. I didn't think you'd agree to come back, but I'm glad you did. Evelyn glanced at him, her expression unreadable. It wasn't about coming back, Jonathan. It was about moving forward. The day of the dedication ceremony arrived with clear skies and a brisk wind that carried the scent of fresh concrete and newly planted landscaping. A crowd gathered at the base of the Phoenix Tower, a mix of investors, city officials, and construction workers who had poured their sweat and skill into the project. Cameras flashed as reporters jostled for the best angles, their microphones aimed at the podium. Evelyn stood off to the side, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She wore a tailored green dress that complemented her confident demeanor, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Jonathan stood beside her, his tuxedo impeccable, his expression calm but focused. The ceremony began with speeches from city officials and project leaders, each one praising the tower as a symbol of progress and resilience. Finally, it was Jonathan's turn. He approached the podium with measured steps, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on Evelyn. Today, he began, his voice steady and commanding, we celebrate not just the completion of a building, but the realization of a vision. The Phoenix Tower stands as a testament to ambition, collaboration, and the power of redemption. He paused, his eyes meeting Evelyn's. I want to take a moment to recognize someone who has been instrumental in this project's success. Evelyn Montgomery. Her insight, determination, and leadership have not only shaped the Phoenix Tower, but have also reminded me of the importance of trust and partnership. The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time in years, Jonathan felt a genuine sense of pride. Not in himself, but in the woman who had risen from the shadows to become his equal. Evelyn stepped forward, shaking Jonathan's hand as she took the podium. Her speech was concise but powerful, focusing on the teamwork and shared vision that had brought the Phoenix Tower to life. She spoke of resilience, of taking chances, and of forging new paths. Her words resonated with the audience, many of whom were witnessing her rise for the first time. As the sun set and the ceremony concluded, Evelyn and Jonathan stood together on the observation deck, watching the city lights flicker to life. The tower loomed above them, its sleek glass exterior reflecting the glow of the skyline. You know, Jonathan said, breaking the comfortable silence, this tower isn't just my legacy anymore. It's ours. Evelyn glanced at him, her lips curving into a faint smile. Ours, she agreed. They stood there for a while longer, the weight of the past giving way to the promise of the future. The Phoenix Tower had risen from the rubble of their mistakes, its foundation stronger than ever. And for Jonathan and Evelyn, it marked not just the end of a journey, but the beginning of something new.